I've been driving a cab in New York for 22 years, and I've learned that true power isn't measured by the size of your frame or the fame you carry. It's measured by how you turn every no into a springboard. That winter afternoon, a man stepped into my car who I recognized immediately, but not because of his looks. It was because of that aura of someone who's proved the world wrong so many times he doesn't even care about proving it anymore. He was carrying that worn leather briefcase. Not some polished executive case, but the kind you carry for decades because every scratch on it is a scar of victory. Beverly Hills, but no rush, he said with that Austrian accent the whole world tried to strip away from him, and in that moment I felt something. I felt I was in the presence of someone who had understood a truth almost no one understands, that your biggest weaknesses can become your greatest weapons if you have the courage to wait long enough. During that ride, which lasted almost an hour through the heavy Manhattan traffic, he told me a story that isn't about luck. It's about someone who woke up in an Austrian village without electricity, saw a photo of a bodybuilder in a magazine at 15, and decided in that exact moment he was going to get out of there and conquer the world. And he did. He arrived in America with $20, slept on strangers' couches, trained in a gym that was just rusty iron, built a body that defined an era, became an actor when Hollywood said his accent would ruin everything, became governor when career politicians laughed, and built a financial empire while other action stars were going bankrupt. But this isn't a story of easy success. It's the story of someone who learned the most brutal lesson of all, that you can win at everything and lose what truly matters, and that sometimes the greatest victory isn't conquering the world. It's learning to live with the ruins you created along the way and trying to fix them before it's too late. At the first red light, as we were passing that avenue lined with mirrored skyscrapers, he broke the silence with that deep voice I'd heard echoing in movie theaters around the world. Do you know what it's like to wake up in a place where your future is already decided before you're born? It wasn't a rhetorical question. It was a genuine invitation for me to understand where he came from, what he had been through. He told me he grew up in Thal, a village so small in Austria it didn't even show up on big maps. You know that kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where stories of past generations define who you're going to be. A house with no indoor bathroom, no hot water, where the winter was so brutal you'd wake up with ice on the inside of the windows. His father was the local police chief, a strict man, the kind who believes life has a pre-written script, military or carpentry, nothing else. Big dreams were considered arrogance where I grew up, he said, and I could feel the weight of those words. He was just 15 years old when he saw that bodybuilding magazine for the first time, and this is where everything changes. Reg Park on the cover. Muscles that looked like they were carved from pure marble, holding the Mr. Universe trophy like it was a crown. And in that moment, he didn't just see a strong, muscular, different man. He saw a map. He saw proof that a completely different world existed beyond that gray village, that the body could be transformed into art, that muscle could work as a passport to freedom. In that moment, I decided, I'm going to be the greatest bodybuilder in the world. I'm going to America. I'm going to become a movie star, he told me. And you could hear in that voice the unshakable certainty of a teenager who doesn't yet understand that the whole world is going to tell you that's impossible. The problem, and here comes the part that hurts, is that nobody believed in him. Literally nobody. His father thought it was completely ridiculous, like some childish joke. His mother cried, thinking he was wasting time with vanity, with crazy stuff. Teachers said he should focus on serious studies, on a real career. Friends laughed openly. Bodybuilder? That's not even a profession. You gonna stand around displaying your body in a circus to make money? But here's the fascinating thing about him that I realized right there in that taxi, on that ride. When everyone around you says you can't do it, that it's impossible, you basically have two choices. You believe them and give up, or you turn all of that into fuel. Fuel for the work, fuel for the sacrifice, and he chose fuel. At 18, when he reached the mandatory age, he enlisted in the Austrian army, because it was the law, because he had no choice. But secretly, he kept training. He spent the day at the military base doing everything they ordered, following every command, and at night he escaped to train in a makeshift gym. like those places you find in small villages where the equipment is ancient, but the iron is real. He even went AWOL, absent without leave, to compete in a junior bodybuilding championship in Stuttgart, Germany. When he came back, he was arrested. He spent a week in military detention, bad food, small cell, punishment for disobeying. But you know what he said? With that smile that conquers crowds? But I won the trophy, and that trophy was worth more than any punishment they could give me. I slowed down in traffic and turned to him, looking right into that face I knew from the movies. Most people quit at the first no. At the first, you can't. You collected no's, literally collected them, and turned each one into a trophy. He nodded heavily, and I could see that truth carried weight. He continued, because when you come from a place where nobody expects anything from you, where nobody believes you can make it, you have something special. You have total freedom. Freedom to fail without disappointing anyone but yourself. When there's no expectation, you can be wild. And right there, in that moment, I already knew the story was going to get even more intense. Because the kid who learned to transform rejection into ambition was about to do something nobody else would do. He adjusted his posture in the back seat as we passed through Times Square, in that moment when the city gets louder, more frantic, and his voice got deeper. That tone you hear when someone is about to tell the part that really hurts, the part that leaves marks. At 21, after years of working, saving every penny, he finally got the money for a one-way ticket, strictly one way, like that flight with no return, to America. He stepped off the plane in 1968 with $20 in his pocket, a suitcase of old clothes he had carried from Austria, and English he could barely use to order a sandwich in a restaurant. I had an accent so thick people asked me to repeat things 3 times before they understood a single word, he said. And I could imagine that desperate young man trying to communicate in that giant city. He had no family on American soil, no friends, no safety net whatsoever. That kind of net normal people have when they move. He just had muscles and ambition. That's it. The first few months were absolutely devastating. Not devastating in the way you read in a book, but truly devastating, the kind you feel in your body. He slept on a borrowed couch in the house of other bodybuilders who were also poor, shared a room with 3 people in a tiny apartment in Venice Beach, ate boiled eggs and cheap supermarket chicken because that was all that fit the budget. You know, that kind of diet where you calculate macros instead of thinking about flavor. He trained at Gold's Gym in Venice Beach, that legendary temple of bodybuilding that was more rusty iron than modern health club. Old, heavy equipment, sometimes dangerous, but real. And inside there he found people of all kinds. Champions who had been through everything, beginners who wanted something better, all competing silently. Nobody had pity. Nobody cut him any slack. Nobody had special compassion for an Austrian immigrant with an accent that sounded like it came out of a horror movie. But here comes the detail he emphasized. The one that hurt the most wasn't the physical poverty. It was the invisibility, that feeling of not existing. In the first few years, I was just that muscular Austrian guy, he said, and you could hear the resentment in that sentence even after decades. Nobody remembered his name. Nobody thought he was going anywhere. Nobody. Bodybuilding back then was seen as a freak show, people who purposely deformed their bodies out of vanity, out of narcissism, people who had no real talent for anything. If you said you were a bodybuilder, people laughed openly or felt a pity that was worse than the laughter, he told me. It was that kind of invisibility that corrodes, like you exist, but you aren't seen. You're there, but you don't matter to anyone. You're training, you're suffering, you're sacrificing, but the world passes by you as if you were wind. I stopped at that red light on 42nd Street and said something I learned in these 2 decades of driving. Something I saw happen many times with people who arrived with heavy stories. Invisibility is a test. It's a real test. A test to see if you give up when no one is watching, when no one is applauding, when no one recognizes your sacrifice. He looked at me in that rearview mirror with that intensity you can feel, and replied, "Exactly. I understood that back then. That invisibility was an opportunity. That invisibility was freedom to work harder than anyone. Because I knew that when the light finally turned on for me, when the world finally looked, I would be so ready that nobody could stop me. And as we passed through those streets he knew well, those neighborhoods where he had sweated, where he had slept on couches, where he had built the foundation of everything that would come later, I realized that period of invisibility hadn't broken him. It had forged him, like metal passing through fire. And I knew that soon the part was coming that would break almost everyone, the part where you achieve success in one thing, but the whole world denies you the next. Some years later, and here the story changes direction completely, he had already conquered what seemed impossible in the bodybuilding universe. Mr. Olympia, multiple times. A physique that defined the standard for an entire era. He had won in that world. He had proved he was the best. He had squeezed every ounce of potential out of that body. But then came the next dream, and this one was even bigger, even more ambitious. Hollywood. And that was where reality hit with brutal force. That was where everything he had conquered suddenly seemed worth nothing. He got an agent, someone who believed that giant body could become an actor, and started auditioning for roles. Audition after audition. And every time, always, it was the same thing echoing in his head. Your accent ruins everything. No one will take you seriously. You look like a villain from a bad movie. You look like a monster. Directors told him straight to his face that his name, Schwarzenegger, was impossible to put on a movie poster. Too long, too difficult, too foreign. No one can say it. A studio executive suggested he change it to something American, like Arnold Strong, as if his name was a problem that needed to be erased. Another said with that corporate coldness, "You have a Frankenstein body. Your face isn't an actor's face. You're only good for a monster, maybe a sci-fi villain." And you know what's worse? These words come out of the mouths of people who have power, people who control opportunities, people who can open or close doors, so you can't simply ignore it. These words get tattooed on your mind. You start to believe that maybe they're right. He told me about a specific audition, one that almost broke him completely. It was for a small role, a secondary villain who didn't even have important lines, you know? Basically stand there, look threatening, maybe speak 2 lines. He prepared. He studied, he walked into the room, read the lines, gave it his all, that intensity you feel when someone really wants it. And the director, a well-dressed man, confident, used to saying no, stopped everything in the middle, just stopped, and said, "Sorry, but I simply can't hear that accent without laughing. It's impossible to take you seriously." The whole room fell into an awkward silence. That kind of silence that lasts centuries in seconds. He walked out of there, can you imagine? Sat in his car alone, and for the first time since he arrived in America, since he started that journey, he thought seriously, truly, maybe they're right. Maybe I really can't do this. That night I stayed awake seriously thinking if I should go back to Austria, open a big gym, live a normal life, have a family, make money, forget all this, he admitted. And you could hear the weight of that confession. The weight of someone who got so close to giving up that he could feel the taste of defeat in his mouth. He had reached a point where believing in himself seemed like pure arrogance, where continuing seemed like madness. And here's the thing I realized in that taxi, a lot of people give up exactly there, at that point, when everything you've built seems worth nothing, when the door slams in your face so hard you can't even get up anymore. I turned a little, just a little, and said, "But you didn't go back." And he smiled, that smile that wins over audiences. No, because I realized something crucial in that dark night in the car. I realized the accent wasn't a weakness. It was a trademark, a brand that nobody else had, that I just needed to find the right role, a role where that accent and that body worked together, not separately, where what Hollywood hated about me became exactly what they needed. And there, in that moment, passing through the streets of LA that had already seen his worst moments, I knew he had discovered something almost no one discovers, that your greatest limitations can become your greatest weapons. If you can survive long enough to figure out how. Rock bottom came disguised as an opportunity, like that kind of gift you open and don't know if it's a blessing or a curse. He got a role in Stay Hungry, a 1976 movie, a low-budget independent production where he played a bodybuilder, literally that. Basically myself, he said, with that irony you only get after suffering enough. It wasn't a role that was going to change a career. It wasn't that role of a lifetime you dream about. It wasn't a big studio blockbuster. It was a small movie that was going to go unnoticed, that probably nobody was going to see, that wasn't going to open any doors. But he decided, and here is the key to that story, that he was going to treat that role as if it were an Oscar, as if it were the most important thing in the world. So he did something few people do. He studied acting obsessively. He recorded his own voice, that heavy Austrian voice, and listened to it repeatedly, trying to soften the accent without losing the identity that defined him. He worked with a dialogue coach. He watched old movies, Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood, studying how actors moved, how they delivered lines, how they occupied space on the screen without needing to say much. Because he understood something crucial. If the accent was a problem, then he needed to create a visual presence so strong that the words became secondary. He worked on movements, worked on expression, worked on that way of being in a space. I knew that could be my only chance, he told me, and I could feel the desperation of that bet. The movie came out. Lukewarm reception. Critics praised, yes, praised, his charisma, his physical presence, that intensity that came from him. But they said the same thing they always said. He'll never be a real actor. He's a bodybuilder. He's not from the field. Hollywood remained closed. Offers didn't come. Money started running out again. That feeling of being back at square one. He went back to teaching at the gym to pay bills because he had to eat, had to pay rent. That invisibility returned. Like going back to the start, you know, he said with that weariness of someone who has already fallen several times and is getting up again. He had transformed an opportunity into a work of art, had dedicated himself entirely, and the result was simply silence, rejection, back to invisibility. And it was there, in that moment of, maybe I really can't do it, in that moment where you ask yourself if it's worth continuing, that everything changed. Because what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that a screenwriter was writing a movie about a warrior from the future who goes back in time. A movie that needed an actor who looked like a machine, who spoke as if he wasn't really human, who had an impossible body, a body that seemed like it came from another planet, from another reality. A movie where that accent and that body didn't just make sense, they made perfect sense. It was as if the entire universe, all those rejections, all those no's, that accent that ruined everything, was conspiring to create exactly the actor that movie needed. I passed by a street he knew well, and I could see he was in that place between past and future. A place where you don't know yet if what you suffered is going to be worth it, or if it was all in vain. And it was at that point, at that exact instant of the story, that the turning point really began. Because sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, not through an easy path, but through suffering that seems infinite. And when the door finally opens, you're so ready, so tough, so transformed that nobody can stop you. Terminator arrived unexpectedly, like that kind of opportunity you almost let pass because you're so used to no that when a yes comes, you don't even believe it. James Cameron, a rookie director making his first big movie, saw him in Stay Hungry and thought something nobody else had thought. This guy isn't a common actor. He's something else completely. They set up a meeting at a random restaurant in LA. Nothing formal, no executive office. And during that conversation, Cameron realized something that had crossed everyone's mind and nobody had taken advantage of. That accent everyone hated was exactly what a killer robot should have. That body that looked like a monster's was exactly what a creature from the future needed to have. That lack of emotion critics had pointed out was pure robotic perfection. But the studio, and here comes the part that proves how the system works against you when you're different, the studio hated the idea completely. Schwarzenegger as a hero? Impossible. He's only good for a villain, and even then we don't buy it. They wanted O.J. Simpson for the role. O.J. Simpson. Imagine that, he said, laughing bitterly. The guy who would later become a symbol of a fallen icon, losing the role to a famous athlete. Cameron insisted. Literally fought. Threatened to leave the project, abandon a movie that was his dream because he believed in that bet. Finally, he got it. Not with a big budget, but with a tiny budget. $6 million, a bet by a studio that thought it was going to fail completely. And he told me something that shifted the whole perspective. When I accepted the role, everyone around me said it was going to ruin my career, that I was going to be marked as a robotic villain forever, that I would never get another role after that. My agent at the time even tried to convince me to refuse because he thought it was a trap. Can you imagine? Your own agent, the person hired to believe in you, asking you to refuse. But he saw something nobody else could see. He saw that this was the perfect role, a role where everything Hollywood hated about him, accent, giant body, robotic movement, became an absolute advantage, where his greatest weaknesses became superpowers. Terminator came out in 1984 and exploded. It wasn't just a success. It was a cultural phenomenon that changed cinema forever. That accent that ruined auditions became an iconic phrase the whole world repeated for decades. I'll be back. That body that looked like a monster became a symbol of the unbeatable, of an unstoppable machine. That lack of emotion critics hated became robotic perfection. A creature that doesn't feel, doesn't care, simply executes. Everything that was a weakness became a strength. And here was the real miracle. A low-budget movie the studio thought was going to fail became one of the biggest box office hits of the 80s. I turned to him in that moment as we passed an avenue that had seen this transformation happen, and I said, "You turned your greatest weakness into your greatest strength." And he nodded with the wisdom of someone who has lived through it all. It wasn't transformation, it was acceptance. I stopped trying to be what Hollywood wanted. Clean American accent, easy name to say, normal body. I became an amplification of what I always was. I became a trademark. I became undeniable. And there, passing through streets he had known as invisible and now recognized as a legend, I knew the story was really starting, because having success is one thing, but what you do after that success is where the true story of a man is revealed. With Terminator, everything accelerated in a way he didn't even completely expect. Suddenly, he wasn't just that bodybuilder with the weird accent anymore. He was Arnold Schwarzenegger, movie star. He was a name that went on movie posters. He was an actor people wanted to see. But here comes the detail that separated him from most actors who reached the top. Instead of repeating the winning formula, repeating that killer robot role in movie after movie, he did something very few people do. He diversified deliberately. He accepted Commando, accepted Predator, accepted The Running Man, movies that explored his physique but added completely different layers. Action comedy, deeper sci-fi, psychological suspense. Each movie was an opportunity to prove he was more than a machine. I knew that if I only did robot, only villain, only killing machine for the rest of my life, I'd become a caricature, he told me. So he started studying how a real actor does it. He studied Clint Eastwood, who did action but with existential depth, with silences that spoke more than dialogue. He studied Harrison Ford, who mixed humor with heroism, who managed to be funny without losing action credibility. He applied that to his own roles, adding comic timing in the right moments, vulnerability in scenes that asked for it. He realized that pure action, without emotion, without humor, became monotonous. He realized that what makes an actor memorable is the capacity to vary. And there's something genius he realized back then, something that would completely change how he related to that accent that haunted him. He transformed the accent into part of the persona. Instead of trying to hide, he amplified it. He started making self-deprecating jokes in interviews about being a muscular Austrian. He embraced the stereotype, but subverted it. Showed in interviews that he could be funny, intelligent, charismatic, not just strong. He made fun of himself before others did. That is a smart tactic. When you laugh at yourself, nobody can hurt you by laughing. Hollywood started to understand something fundamental back then. He wasn't a common actor you discard. He was a brand. He was a phenomenon. And brands have negotiating power that normal actors don't have, because a brand means people are going to see a movie with your name on it. It means the studio makes money. It means you control the narrative. It's not the critics who control it. It's not the studio that controls it. It's you. You are so undeniable the studio has to accept your terms. And he understood that completely. He started choosing roles based not on, will this improve my acting career, but on, will this strengthen my brand? The difference is everything. And while we passed through those Hollywood streets he had conquered that now recognized him, I realized something important. He hadn't achieved all this by pretending to be someone he wasn't. He had achieved it by transforming who he was into a weapon. Because there's a crucial lesson there. The world doesn't want a copy. The world wants an original. The world wants someone so confident in themselves that they can turn weakness into a trademark. And as he kept telling the story, I knew the next phase was going to be completely different, because success in art is one thing, but success in business is a completely other dimension. But here comes the part few people know, the part that separates who gets rich temporarily from who builds an empire that lasts for generations. While other action actors spent millions on absurd cars, on expensive parties, on drugs, on everything that looked like success, he invested. He invested obsessively. In 1970, while still an unknown bodybuilder, he earned money teaching classes and winning small competitions, and bought his first apartment building in Los Angeles, his first property. And you know what the reaction of the people around him was? They laughed. Why does a bodybuilder need real estate? Shouldn't you be spending on sports cars, on parties, on the actor lifestyle? They said. But he had learned something crucial, something most never learn. Muscles disappear with age, fame passes when you get old, beauty fades, but wealth built with intelligence, that stays. So he started studying investments like he studied actor movements, obsessively. He read books on real estate. The Millionaire Real Estate Investor is like a Bible for anyone who wants to do this. Talked to serious investors, learned the difference between a good investment and dumb speculation. He applied every cent he earned, not in luxury, but in assets that generated passive income. Because understand this, you can make $100 million in an acting career, but when the career ends, it ends. But if you have 20 buildings generating income every month, you will never be broke. Never. Passive income is true freedom. When Terminator exploded and money started coming in serious quantities like real millions, he didn't do what the majority does. He didn't buy an absurd mansion in Beverly Hills. He bought more real estate, invested in shopping centers, created a diversified portfolio, like you don't put everything in one place. Residential real estate, commercial land, stocks and companies he knew. Every investment thought out strategically. While other actors went bankrupt after 3 bad movies, and wait, how many actors do you know who went broke after making millions? I had income coming from 20-30 different sources, he said, with that calm of someone who knows he's safe. And here came the lesson he gave me, and I'm only passing it on because it's too important to be forgotten. Success isn't about how much you earn. It's about how much you keep. It's about how much you multiply. Because earnings are temporary. Multiplication is permanent. Like, if you earn $100,000 a year and spend $120,000, you're losing. If you earn $10,000 and spend $5,000, you're winning even if the number is smaller. The ratio is what matters. The discipline is what matters. And he had military discipline. It came from that Austrian army, from that bodybuilding training that doesn't accept laziness. And while he told me about those properties, about those strategic investments he made over the years, while we passed through those neighborhoods of Los Angeles that he owned pieces of, I understood that this was the real difference. Because anyone can make money if they have enough talent. But keeping money, multiplying it, building wealth that will last beyond you, that is another story completely. And here the part was coming where everything was going to change again. Because he had shown he could win in cinema, and now he was going to show he could win in business too. In the late 80s, he was the king of action. Undeniable, uncontested. Movies exploding at the box office. His name carried a guarantee of success. But everyone, critics, the studio, even some close people, said the same thing with that certainty that is worse than an insult. Arnold can't do comedy. He's a killing machine, not a comedian. His body is too big. His accent is too heavy. It doesn't work for humor. And again, That word he knew well. Can't, can't, can't. Can you imagine? After everything he had proved, that nobody could stop him, that impossible was just a word, still they repeated, "You can't do this." Then Twins arrived in 1988, a movie where he and Danny DeVito would play twins separated at birth. Pure visual absurdity. A giant Austrian man and a small New York actor as brothers. The entire script was a joke on that juxtaposition. The studio thought it was completely ridiculous, like they refused at first. No one is going to believe you are brothers. No one is going to laugh with Arnold in a comedy. This is career suicide. They offered a low salary because they were certain, absolutely certain, that the movie was going to fail. Like an investment you make only because a contract obliges you, but that you already write off as a loss. He could have accepted that low salary, done the movie, and that's it. Many actors do that, but he didn't. He did something a lot of people can't do. He negotiated differently. He told the studio, "I don't want a fixed salary, I want a percentage of the profits." The studio agreed happily, thinking there would be no profit, thinking they were winning, thinking they had closed a deal where Arnold was the dummy. The movie came out, and it exploded. It wasn't just a success, it was a huge success. Audiences laughed, critics were surprised. Arnold is funny? How? He had managed to do comedy without losing action credibility. He had managed to be vulnerable, funny, human, without seeming weak. The movie made hundreds of millions, and that percentage he had negotiated? It yielded more than any salary he would have asked for, much more. That proved something crucial to me. He told me with that satisfaction of someone who had seen a plan work perfectly, that I controlled my narrative, that I decided who I was, not the critics. That if you can negotiate right, you earn more by thinking differently than everyone else. And here comes the real teaching behind that story. Because Twins wasn't just about proving he could do comedy, it was about understanding movie economics. It was about knowing that the studio wants to win fast without risk. That's why a fixed salary makes sense to them. But if you're willing to bet on yourself, if you're willing to risk, you can earn proportionately much more. Because salary is a limit, profit is unlimited. And he had so much confidence in himself that he managed to convince the studio to agree to that bet. And while we passed by those Los Angeles theaters that had shown Twins, a movie that was supposed to be a total failure but became a phenomenon, I realized he had understood something that separated the super rich from the normal rich. The super rich don't negotiate salary. The super rich negotiate equity. Because salary is when you trade time for money. Equity is when money works for you while you sleep. And here, in that moment, he had proved again that he could. Not only could he win, but he could win in a way that whoever bet against him lost money. In the 90s, he had conquered everything a man could conquer in cinema: fame, money, international respect. His name opened doors that nobody else could open. But then he did something very few celebrities managed to do. He married Maria Shriver. It wasn't a common marriage. Maria was President Kennedy's niece, a family with deep political history, a family with power that came from generations. And that marriage, and here is the key, opened a completely new door: politics. Suddenly, he wasn't just a famous actor. He was the husband of a person with real political connections. He was part of a family that understood power, that understood how to govern. But again, and do you see the pattern in his life? Total resistance. Immigrant bodybuilder doesn't understand American politics. This is a joke. This guy knows nothing about government. Leave him alone. Critics, analysts, people with real political careers, all laughing, all thinking it was a prank. But he wasn't a man who gives up when everyone laughs. He studied intensely, like he had studied acting, like he had studied investments, like he had studied everything he needed to master. He read about public policy, talked to serious politicians, started getting involved in specific causes, educational programs for kids, national fitness initiatives, public health issues. It wasn't desk politics, it was street work, work where he could see direct results. And when finally, in 2003, he announced his candidacy for governor of California, the fifth largest economy in the world, you know? Everyone laughed. Movie studios laughed. Career politicians laughed. The media laughed. A bodybuilder is going to govern California? Seriously? Too much of a joke. But he had learned, really learned, that when everyone laughs, you're probably close to something real. Because if nobody thought it was possible, nobody would have time to laugh. They would defeat you in silence. But laughter means you touched a nerve. It means it bothers them. The campaign was brutal, not in the physical sense, but in the sense of being attacked from all sides. Opponents attacked everything: accent, past as an actor, lack of political experience. They published clips of him from action movies. This is the man who wants to be governor? But here is the interesting thing. He had learned decades earlier to transform attack into advantage. He used his accent to connect with immigrants. Because an immigrant understands an accent. Because they recognize that an accent doesn't mean a lack of intelligence. He used fame to reach voters who never cared about real politics, because cinema reaches where politics doesn't reach. He used that body, now older but still impressive, as a visual symbol of discipline, of possible transformation, of, if this guy can transform his body, maybe he can transform the state too. And here comes the detail that isn't small. He won. He governed California for 2 terms. He wasn't a perfect governor. Nobody is. There were economic crises he couldn't control completely. There were decisions critics question. But he did something almost nobody manages to do. He proved again that he was capable. That when he said, "I'm going to do this," he could do it. Because here is the real thing about power. Power isn't being good at everything. Power is the capacity to learn, to adapt, to surround yourself with people better than you in areas you don't master, and to have the courage to lead even when everyone thinks you're a joke. And while we passed through those streets of Sacramento, the capital of the state he had governed, I realized the story was reaching the turning point, because now came the part that would break almost all men. The campaign for governor was brutal, in a way that perhaps nothing before had been, because before it was just a personal career at stake. Now it was an entire state. Opponents didn't just attack him, they attacked everything. They attacked the accent as if it were a disqualification. They attacked his past as an actor as if cinema was a disqualification for government. They attacked lack of political experience, as if traditional experience was the only way to govern. They published clips of him in action movies where he killed people, suggesting that was the real Arnold. They tried to reduce him to a movie character, a caricature. The strategy was clear. If they could make the population see him as an actor pretending to be a politician, they could defeat him. If they could make it look like a joke, they could destroy him. But here is the thing that separated him from any other candidate. He had spent decades learning to transform attack into advantage. It wasn't new to him. The accent they tried to use against him, he used it to connect with the immigrant community, because an immigrant who arrived like him understood sacrifice, understood struggle, understood that an accent doesn't mean lack of capacity. "I am you," he essentially said. "I arrived where you arrived. Now I want to return the favor." The fame as an actor they tried to use against him, he used it to reach voters who never cared about traditional politics, because cinema reaches where political speeches never reach. Because people who don't watch the news watch movies. Because he was familiar in a way a traditional politician would never be. And that body, that body that had been an entire barrier, that had been a motive for rejection, that had been the reason nobody believed in him, he used that as a visual symbol. Because when you see someone who transformed his body through discipline, through extreme dedication, through refusal to accept limitations, you think, if that guy managed to do that with his body, maybe he can do something with the state too. That body became a metaphor for possible transformation. That bodybuilder discipline became proof of the capacity to work hard, to be consistent, to not give up when it gets tough. He won. It wasn't an easy victory. It was a victory against all the odds experts had established. Media that thought it was a joke had to recognize it wasn't a joke. Career politicians who had laughed had to sit at the table with that immigrant bodybuilder as a colleague. And here comes the crucial point that isn't small. He governed for 2 terms. He wasn't a flawless governor. Nobody is. He had to face the economic crisis of 2008 that nobody can control completely. He had decisions that critics question to this day, but he did something almost nobody manages to do. He proved again that he was capable. Because real power, the kind of power that matters, isn't being perfect at everything. Real power is the capacity to learn fast in an area you don't master. It's the capacity to surround yourself with people better than you at the things you don't know well. It's the courage to stand up and try even when you're being ridiculed. It's the refusal to accept that certain places are for people like that and others aren't. And as we passed through Sacramento, capital of the state he had governed, the state he had tried to transform, I could see that everything was changing again. Because success in business is one thing. Success in politics is another. But now came the part that breaks. When everything you built falls, and you have to learn to live with the ruins. But there were scandals. There were moments where everything he had built started to collapse. And here is the part he hesitated before telling. Like, you could feel it was still painful, even after years. There was betrayal that destroyed his marriage. Discoveries about relationships he had while he was with Maria. Political mistakes that cost dearly. Decisions that affected people's lives. Moments where ego overcame wisdom. Moments where too much power made him believe he could do things he shouldn't do. Moments where the boy who left Austria with nothing, who learned to respect limits, who learned to work within rules, that boy got lost inside the powerful man he had become. If I could go back, he told me, and you could feel the weight of that sentence. If I could go back to those moments, I would focus less on proving critics were wrong. I would focus less on winning everything. I would focus less on showing that I am undeniable. He paused, breathed, and I would focus more on being truly happy, on being present with the people I loved, on realizing that some things, family, trust, respect, shouldn't be sacrificed to prove a point to anyone. And here is the teaching that doesn't come from success. It comes from failure you have to live through. Because anyone can tell you how to win when everything goes right. But telling you about how you destroyed things that mattered, how you sacrificed people you loved in the name of ambition, that is true wisdom. That is an honesty very few manage to have. He had reached a point in his life where he realized he had gained everything and lost things that really mattered. He had proved he could be bigger than the limitations the world tried to place, but in the process, he had become a man the people who loved him didn't recognize. And there's something real happening there in that taxi. He wasn't doing that to look humble, to look regretful, to sell a story of easy redemption. He was telling it because he really understood, because he had lived the consequences, because he had to look at himself in the mirror and recognize that maybe that drive, that fuel that pulled him out of an Austrian village without electricity and put him at the top, maybe that drive also transformed him into a man who couldn't just win, who needed to win at everything, who needed to be right about everything, who needed to prove something to the whole world all the time. And while he told that, while the taxi passed through New York streets he had conquered decades ago, I realized something important, that a movie villain is simple. A movie villain wants one thing and does everything for it. But a real man is complicated. A real man manages to be a hero in some areas and a villain in others. Manages to transform the world and destroy a family. Manages to win everything and lose what matters. And the real story isn't about how you win. It's about how you learn from losses, how you try to fix things, how you grow through the pain you created. He adjusted his posture in the back seat as we turned onto the final street, and his voice changed to that tone you use when you're closing a chapter, when you're bringing the story back to the present. And that brings me to today, he said, just like that, like someone who had already told everything he needed to tell. Today he's back to movies, not because he needs money, not because he needs to prove anything. He went back because he loves the work. Because he understood that maybe that passion for work had destroyed some things, but it destroyed them because it was too pure. It was too intense. Today, he tries to be intense, but conscious. He went back to business too, because that side of him that loves to build, that loves to multiply, that loves to create things that last, that doesn't go away. It's who he is. But now he does it with the wisdom of someone who learned that an empire of money without an empire of relationships is just an empty building. "I don't need to prove anything anymore," he said, and you could feel the relief in that sentence. "I already proved it. Proved it to the whole world. Proved it to the critics. Proved it to people who said I couldn't. Now I build because I love building. Now I work because I love work. Now I live because I love living. The difference is everything." He had reached that point in his life where finally he could separate the ambition that pulled him from nothing from the ambition that pulled him from himself, where he managed to recognize that that brutal drive which defined him also had a price he had to pay. And while we passed the last few miles to Beverly Hills, the neighborhood he had helped build, properties he owned, structure he had created, he told me briefly but heavily that he had rebuilt his relationship with his children, that he had learned to be present, that he had learned that sometimes winning in business means losing in the heart, and that the trade isn't worth it, that he had understood that a real legacy isn't how much you accumulated, it's what kind of person you became and what kind of people you helped create around you. He asked to be dropped off in front of a building. It wasn't an ostentatious mansion. It was a property he had bought years ago that he had renovated, that he had transformed into something worth much more than when he bought it. Like that metaphor for life, you receive things, you work on them, you transform them, you leave them for the next person in better condition. He grabbed that worn leather briefcase he had brought at the start of the ride, the one that had accompanied him on the whole journey, and got out of the taxi. He waved simply. It wasn't a dramatic farewell. It was the farewell of someone who had said everything he needed to say, who had shared everything he could share. And he vanished into that building, leaving only silence and a story vibrating in the air. I stayed there for a few more minutes after he got out, processing everything I had just heard on that ride. In 22 years driving a cab, I hear stories. Stories of people who quit early, people who got close but didn't make it, people who won but ended up empty. But there was something different in that story, because it wasn't about talent. There were people way too talented who never left square one. It wasn't about luck. Luck would be everything going right in the first movie. It wasn't about genes or privilege. He started literally from nothing. It was about something simpler and more brutal. It was about the absolute refusal to accept limitations others tried to place on him. It was about transforming every no into fuel. It was about understanding that a critic who laughs at you does so because you touched something real. It was about having the courage to be wrong, to fall, to destroy things, and still keep trying. The truth that man proved with every departure and every return, with every failure that became success, with every impossible that became reality, is this: the world doesn't want a copy. The world wants an original so confident he transforms weakness into a trademark. Now I ask you, and this question is real, it's not rhetorical, what is the no you are accepting as truth when it should be fuel? What is the thing everyone says you can't do, that you hear every day, that you've already started to believe? What is the accent, the wrong body, the wrong origin, the wrong background that you are using as an excuse not to try? Because there is something nobody tells you, nobody wants you to discover, that characteristics the whole world hates in you might be exactly what makes you undeniable if you have the courage to take them to the extreme. If this story, the story of someone who started from nothing and built everything, touched you in some way, if you recognized in some point of that journey your own limitations, your own struggles, do this with me. Hit the like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that impossible is just a word. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next rides. Because every week there are people getting into this taxi with a story that will change how you see the world. And comment down below. What was the no that you turned into a yes? What was the time you almost quit but decided to continue? Who was the person who believed in you when nobody else was betting on you? See you on the next ride.